Hey everybody, I'm so glad you could be here with me today. For those of you who are new to my world, I'm Manisha. I'm a somatic healing practitioner, and I work with smart, conscious women, and I help them do the inner work so that they can show up truly as themselves in relationships. So I'm happy that you're here. Today I'm going to be talking about giving. Giving from this perspective of obligation versus giving from this place of like feeling really grounded and neutral and wanting to give and that not be being depleting. And so this was coming up, especially because I was noticing in my own life and when I'm speaking to clients how in certain relationships it feels really good to have that back and forth, that exchange. It feels really life giving, and you don't really have a lot of charge around it. You're kind of like, yeah, I want to do this for this person, or I want to be there for this person, or I want to offer this thing, without even being asked, because I can kind of tell that maybe they need some support or need to talk through something, and so like I just want to willingly like offer that, and that feels really, really good. And then there are other people, and you might be experiencing this. You can just sort of track like your week or your month and notice like when were some of those times where you felt like maybe you did notice somebody needed something, but you also felt like, okay, I can kind of feel that, but I don't actually have the bandwidth right now to do that. So your decision in that moment might be like, I'm going to reach out, but I'm going to do it, a little bit later, like when I feel like I've got this space and the mental space. And the emotional space, or you might notice that you still reach out even when you're not in a good place because you just feel like you need to. And so that's like the little space that I'd love for you to investigate because, I think, I talk a lot about boundaries. I talk about self-care. I talk about how do we take care of ourselves so that we can take care of other people. And I think that's really nuanced, because I think it can be easy to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to say no to all these things and yes to all these things. And, people are like, well, if you don't like fully feel the yes, like you shouldn't say the yes. But sometimes like we don't know what we're fully feeling because we haven't really had that practice of like listening to our bodies or turning inside or doing any kind of like regular checking in with ourselves. So if you're not checking in with yourselves regularly, like in terms of how does my body feel, like how does my mind feel, how does my spirit feel like when I'm doing this thing or engaging with this person, like it's really hard to have a go-to kind of energy to lean into, be like, oh, like this is what it feels like when it feels really good, or this is what it feels like when it feels depleting. Because if you are used to being in more relationships that take from you than fuel you or give you, then that's going to be what's familiar to you. Right? And so we will default to what's familiar to us just because it's familiar. It's like if we don't know a different way, then it's not like, oh, well, I'm choosing to do this thing that maybe not be so good for me. It's like, I just don't know a different way. So this is just the way. So I think in that sense, we can also really be compassionate with ourselves. Like if we've started to notice this pattern with certain people, and start to realize like, oh, okay, it's not because I'm like choosing something purposely that's not good for me. I just didn't really know that there was a different option. And I will say, like, it could be the flip side too, right? Like maybe you're the person who is feeling like there's a lot going on and you need a lot and you're reaching out to people and maybe like you don't feel like they're returning that to you. So just kind of check in there too, because in terms of like, oh, am I catching them at a time where they might not be available? Or like, can I check in with them to ask if they have time and space for me? And it could, feel better for everybody. So, I think that as caretakers and caregivers, we maybe more tend to be on the side of like, let me take care of you and kind of ignore my own needs. However, like everyone can be in that space where they're just like, really feeling overwhelmed and like need some support and may not realize that they are asking for something from other people who also might be like in that same state. So it's such a balance, and it's such like a thing that we can be compassionate around for ourselves, but also for other people, and like checking in with kind of the relationship and the dynamics. And because there are going to be times in our relationships, especially close ones, where you're going to show up more for somebody else than they can for you, and vice versa, just because that's life, and and we're going to have like ebbs and flows where we're able to give more than we receive. So that's not exactly what I'm talking about, but I wanted to share that because I think that we can go to this place of like, well, does it feel balanced? And I don't really know. And, just kind of questioning it. So I think that from that perspective, I really like to, that's why I'm always talking about like, how can you tune in with your body? How can you like notice what you're feeling? And that's why that's so much my go-to, because it's not necessarily these outside things of like, well, I did this and they did this. It's not like we're counting or we're trying to be like, to match it like thing per thing. We're really noticing like, how does this feel for me? Like, does this feel like it brings me some energy? Does it feel like it's like lighting me up? Or does it feel like something that like I really want to do? And sometimes we can feel kind of tired but still want to do something, right, for people, and it still can feel good even though we're tired, right? But then there's other times, and like often what I notice around this is like there's other times when like that obligation energy is there, where we'll feel really avoidant or hesitant to reach out or respond or engage with somebody, or we'll feel kind of irritated. Or this is a good one, and I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on this, but like if somebody else asked you the same thing, maybe you would be like, oh yeah, no problem. But if like that this other person that maybe you're like kind of questioning asked you the exact same thing, that might trigger you, it might annoy you, it might make you feel like, like why is this person asking so much of me? So that's like a really good telltale sign too. Like if you're getting like a similar request or having a similar conversation with two different people, with one person it feels like totally fine, and with the other person it feels kind of burdensome, this is like obviously something that needs to be like looked at and felt into and like investigated, and just like getting, being curious about like, well, what's going on there? Like, what's the dynamic there? And maybe like looking at the history of that relationship a little bit, and, noticing where there might be like some unevenness, or like maybe it feels one-sided to some degree. So these are things that again can be hard to just like on the surface like look at the circumstance and decide whether something is like working or not, or one-sided or not, or feeling like reciprocal or not. It's really like such a practice, I think, of turning inwards and like kind of sitting with that, discomfort or irritation or the trigger or the charge, and really getting clear on what that means for you. Because even if you talk to like a friend about it, they might have a different perspective just based on their own life experience. I'm sure we've all had that. It's like you'll share something and they'll be like, well, that doesn't seem like a big deal. Like, what's the big deal with that? Or you'll share something and you're not sure, and they'll be like, oh my God, that's terrible. I can't believe that person like would say that or do that. Like, that's so ridiculous. Or, and we're all acting from like our own perspective, right? Our own triggers. And, which is why I'm such an advocate of being able to talk to somebody neutral. Like if you're working with a therapist or a coach or a mentor or a healer, like ideally that person is not going to be like jumping on your bandwagon and like agreeing with you immediately or totally discounting. Like they're just like, oh, that's really interesting. Have you thought about it like this? Like what does this feel like? And when I work with clients, I'm here, well, of course, listen to their whole situation, but then I'll be like, well, let's drop into your body and see what that feels like, and let's see what this situation feels like, and notice the difference, and how can we make some of those connections? And it's like such subtle work, but this is the kind of work that certainly you can get support around if you want to move through it a little bit faster and like get some outside perspective. But it's also work that you can 100% practice like on your own, of even if it's like 5 minutes every evening, before you go to bed, or maybe the transition between like when you're done with work and before you sort of start your evening, just kind of checking in, like, how did my day feel? How do I feel right now at the end of this part of my day? Like, what interactions felt good and positive, and which interactions felt draining? And you can really start to recognize that. And then when you are asked, for something, or you're asked to give, or you're asking for something, you can really like have a larger perspective around that, and not always just have a larger perspective around that, because you have you've tuned into your body enough to recognize like what feels like good and what doesn't feel good. And then there's like other layers to that, right? Because something that, like I said, with the familiarity, like if you're familiar with something, like you're just going to keep doing it. And so if you are continuing to do something, you're like, well, that feels okay, that feels fine, but then maybe you're seeing like other repercussions in the relationship where, there's like arguments, or there's places of like value misalignment or other things, then that's like another layer, or like an indication to be like, okay, well, I think this feels okay, but like these other things are happening on the outside. Like, let me dig a little bit deeper and like see what's going on there. So this kind of work, like with our bodies and our minds and our spirits, and like how we kind of internally process and then show up on the outside, is like so multi-layered. So you can really dive as deep as you want. However, I think that this, like a little bit more, hopefully this is making sense in the sense of this just more it's not superficial, but just this like other perspective that's more surface level of like, how does this feel? Like, how does this exchange feel? Like, how am I showing up in this relationship? And how is this person showing up for me? And like, am I giving from this place of like feeling full and abundant with my time and energy, versus feeling like this little like sense of like guilt, or just like a discomfort, or pushing through a uncomfortable feeling to like be able to be there for somebody, and then just feeling really drained on the other side. So this just feels like a super important topic now, especially like we are year 3 into pandemic, and it is just like everyone's bandwidth is really limited. And I should say like limited in the sense of, I think we're all in this place of like really reorganizing and discerning like how we're spending our time, and who we're spending it with, and like what we're doing with our time, because we've just experienced, certainly everyone in different ways, like this period of like being quiet and kind of like noticing what's going on, and like the taking away of like so many activities and people and like things that we would normally do, or we wouldn't have the time and space to reflect on some of these things. So getting into these spaces where we're really like, oh, okay, like I have like a different level of choice of like what I do and how I interact, and like how I'm showing up, and how I want to be in relationships, and like how I want people to show up for me. So it's really been such a huge time, I think, for so many people, like for clients, and even, many friends that I've spoken to, where they're just like reassessing a lot of relationships. And so I think we have been in a period where we've been like a little more quiet, enough to feel and notice like what feels good and what doesn't feel good. So I bring this to you to just like help you think about it, hopefully in a slightly different way. And if you are noticing like that kind of push-pull or struggle or feeling of like obligation or guilt with like one person or a couple people, just start to get curious about that. I think sometimes people feel like, oh my God, I have to make this change right away. Like this isn't right. Something's off, but I don't know what to do. And so you don't have to do anything like right that second, right? Because your body and nervous system probably won't allow you to. It will feel too scary. It might feel so unfamiliar that it feels scary. It might feel like, well, if I say this to this person, they'll be like so upset with me, and I just can't handle somebody being that upset with me. Like there are just so many things underneath that will come up when we start to create more space around our time and our energy, and like become more discerning about what we're doing with it. So just recognize that there are layers, and I hope that this has given you just some food for thought around like how you're spending your day, how you're spending your time, like how you're spending your energy, and that you really do have a choice around how you do that and who you choose to give it to. And so I would encourage you to just take a little bit of time and like observe, just be curious, if the 5 minutes of kind of quiet time, or even if you're a journaler, if you want to like journal, transition point during your day or at the end of the day, really start doing those regular check-ins, because they're going to give you more information about like what you need and how you're feeling, and like how you can keep resourcing yourself so that you can really use your time and energy in a way that really supports you, like for your own personal needs, but then really supports you in like cultivating the kind of relationship that you want to be in. So let me know if you have any thoughts or questions about that. I love hearing them, and I'll talk to you next week. Okay.